I knew the room would tilt the moment the truth left my mouth, and the silence that followed felt surgical, cold, and painfully precise, like the last flat line before a heartbeat disappears forever. My mother's smile froze mid-curve, a fragile expression cracking under the weight of what she sensed was coming. My father cleared his throat with that old, familiar authority he always carried, the kind that claimed ownership not just of the house or the conversation, but of me, my choices, and the narrative he believed he still controlled. "Sit," he ordered, as if I were a faulty equation he intended to solve, but I didn't sit yet. I wanted them to feel the shift in the air, the imbalance they couldn't identify because tonight wasn't their intervention, it was mine. And the folder tucked under my arm, unnoticed by them but burning like a loaded weapon in my possession, was the reason their world was seconds away from tilting off its axis. There was a time when I genuinely thought their approval was oxygen. I'd chased it through perfect report cards pinned on the fridge, through science fair trophies polished until my reflection shone back, through late-night study sessions that led to the scholarship letter I held with trembling, hopeful hands. They had clapped back then too, but it was always polite applause, distant, formal, the kind you offer a stranger's child rather than your own. Graduation day was the breaking point I never recovered from. I saved 2 seats in the front row with their names written neatly, believing foolishly that maybe, just maybe, they'd show up for a moment that mattered to me. Those 2 empty chairs became the loudest part of the ceremony. When I confronted them later, Mom didn't even look up from organizing bills as she said, "We had real responsibilities," and Dad added that ceremonies were unnecessary for expected accomplishments. That was the day I learned a truth that had been whispering for years. Some people will never clap for you unless they benefit. The shift afterward was gradual, almost invisible. They reached out only when they needed me tax advice, banking help, online accounts reset, passwords deciphered. Dad's sudden interest in my career aligned perfectly with the rumor he'd heard about my promotion, and yet he never asked how I felt, only what I earned. But everything snapped into focus the day a friend from commercial real estate sent me an article about a young investor who had purchased a $2.88 million spyglass penthouse. My name wasn't mentioned, but the details were too specific to mistake. I had closed that deal silently, intentionally, wanting a moment that was mine alone. Only hours after the article was published, Dad texted. Not congratulations, not pride, just family dinner. 7 p.m., important discussion. I knew then that important meant profitable for them. That was the moment hope finally died and a plan took its place. I didn't cry, didn't rage, didn't crumble. Instead, I began collecting everything I had ignored for years. Screenshots of guilt-laced messages, records of borrowed money that magically slipped from their memory, notes on their manipulations so subtle I once believed they were normal, and most importantly, documentation showing they had tried quietly, secretly, to use my identity to apply for a line of credit. They failed, but the betrayal was enough. I built my revenge like an architect building a skyscraper, quietly, steel beam by steel beam, far from their sight. I moved all my assets into a trust handled by an attorney whose name they didn't even know. I closed every account they had ever linked to or snooped around. I secured the penthouse, the same one Dad had bragged about to his colleagues, believing he could someday leverage my success for his benefit. And finally, I filed a discreet fraud report that placed a watch on anything connected to their names. The point wasn't punishment, it was protection. The punishment would come tonight. When I finally sat at the dining table, placing the folder gently on the linen cloth, Dad's eyes locked onto it like a man spotting buried treasure. Mom pretended not to stare, though her gaze kept drifting back. "You bought a penthouse," Dad said, not a question, an accusation soaked in entitlement. "I did," I replied simply. Mom leaned forward with a voice dipped in sugar and poison, suggesting I add them to the title temporarily for tax advantages. That was the moment I slid the folder toward them. Slowly, deliberately, Dad opened it. Confusion flickered across his face, then realization, and finally the sharp stab of horror as he saw everything. The credit attempt, the fraud flags, the trust documents sealing every cent, every asset, every future investment beyond their reach. "It's over," I said, my voice steady, almost serene. "Your access, your expectations, your entitlement." Mom's face collapsed into something between fear and disbelief. Dad whispered, "You'd do this to your own parents." I leaned forward, meeting his gaze without blinking, and said, "You did it first." Silence swallowed the room thick, revealing, final. I stood, letting the weight of truth settle over them like dust. At the doorway, I delivered the last line, clean as a verdict. "You skipped my graduation. Tonight, I'm skipping yours." Then I walked out without looking back. The night air greeted me cold, sharp, honest, and for the first time in years, it felt clean. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply walks away from a family dinner, carrying nothing but a closed folder and an entirely new life.